台湾のソーシャルイノベーション。オードリー・タン、台湾ソーシャルイノベーション担当のデジタル大臣。オードリー・タン氏に聞くデジタルと未来への展望。2020年、世界を襲った新型コロナウイルス。台湾はその封じ込めにいち早く成功しました。その中心的な存在として世界から注目を集めたのがオードリー・タンさんです。台湾台北市で生まれたオードリー・タンさんは幼い頃よりコンピュータに興味を示し、12歳からパールというプログラミング言語を学び始めました。14歳の時、生まれつき体が弱く学校生活に馴染めなかったこともあり、中学校を中退、独学で研究を進める道を選びます。19歳でシリコンバレーに渡り、ソフトウェア会社を起業。プログラミング言語パール6、元楽の開発などで知られるようになります。同時期に性別移行を開始し、トランスジェンダーであることを公表。名前を当総監から当方に変え、英語名をオードリー・タンとしました。その後、33歳でビジネスの現場から退き、アップルやオックスフォード出版、ベンキューなどのデジタル顧問を務め、アップルではシリなどのプロジェクトに参画しました。2014年、台湾で起こったひまわり学生運動で、オードリー・タンさんは初めて政治と関わります。台湾政治もまたこの時から大きく変化していきました。そして2016年、35歳の時、蔡英文政権において史上最年少で行政院に入閣、デジタル担当の政務委員に登用され、現在に至るまでさまざまな取り組みを行われています。
Hello everyone, I'm Audrey Tang, Taiwan's Digital Minister in charge of social innovation. Well, I didn't become a politician overnight. I became a poetician. A poetician to me is someone who writes poetry, who uses language like fast, fair, and fun, humor over rumor, the collective intelligence, and so on, to make sure that people understand what the politicians are doing and think about better ways to engage the public. For example, when we occupied the parliament back in 2014, my role, instead of to protest any particular measure of the cross-strait service and trade agreement, is rather about a demonstration, a demo of how a listening at scale facilitation method can actually get 500,000 people on the street and many more online into the idea of rough consensus, where people understood what each other's concerns are and also can innovate to think of new ways to tackle democracy as a technology. So this is not just about your ordinary politics of giving 3 bits of information every 4 years per person, which is called voting, by the way, but about a continuous democracy where everyone, also including us poets and people working on language, can also contribute meaningfully to politics by making sure that people understand what really is going on in the government. Well, very interestingly, the government should trust the citizens first. The citizens may or may not trust back, and that's fine. I mean, otherwise it's called fascism, where the citizens give the government blind trust, right? So we're not asking for the blind trust. As I mentioned, it's all about making sure that the government responds in a competent fashion whenever there's any serious doubts, anxieties, fears, and so on. So, for example, during the pandemic, we worked out a way to ration out the mask, but there's a lot of different ideas about where the masks are, a lot of conspiracy theories, a lot of disinformation even. And because of that, the civil society people, the civic technologists in Tainan, including Howard Wu, Finjen Kiang, and so on the GovZero community made the mask rationing map. that visualized exactly how many masks are there in the nearby convenience stores and later on pharmacies. And because of this collaboration, the government merely agreed to publish the pharmacist numbers every 30 seconds. And so instead of blindly trust the Central Epidemic Command Center, anyone queuing in line can check for themselves whether the people queuing before them have actually purchased 2 or 3, nowadays it's 10, medical masks using their national health card. And if there's any anomaly in the numbers, they will call the toll-free number 1922. And so this accountability and competency, I think, is the most important thing. And so if people work with the people, not working just for other people, then the young people will become more interested in politics because there's much more that those young people can do, just as the Code for Japan community created the Stop COVID-19 dashboard with the Tokyo Metropolitan Government. I also contributed to change one typo in that dashboard. But if on the other hand, the government doesn't open up the numbers, doesn't provide a transparency, then there's nothing that the civic technologists can work on, and the trustworthiness will be very difficult to build. And so for the career public servants out there, I would say trust the government is not as important as trusting the citizen. Trust your citizens more. Well, by radical transparency, I mean transparency at the root, meaning that by default, it is transparent. But if during the conversation with me, for example, you say something that will compromise the privacy of your friend because you told of their story, or it is a privacy concern for yourself and so on, then you can always change that part and only that part within the 10 days after a conversation with me, so that it takes more effort to redact the sensitive materials and privacy details. But by default, it is open. So I'm not saying that we live stream everything. I merely say that it should be more time consuming to redact the parts pertaining to privacy and so on, rather than having everything being closed and selectively open. Because being selectively open is just like an open data that is updated only every other year or something. It is not very useful. Well, to me, I think the older generation in Japan have a lot to give and a lot to learn also from the younger people. But maybe it is culture, and that's certainly something that Taiwan shares, that in a room with the very senior people and the very junior people, always the senior people speaks first, and the junior people may not have the time to speak. But in Taiwan, when we installed the reverse mentor system in the cabinet, we specifically called them advisors, members of the advisory council of the cabinet. And so even though some of them may just be 19 years old, but still we call them counselors, advisors. And so these titles means a lot because people respect the titles even more than seniority. So next time around, try to find a reverse mentorship relationship where you can institutionalize and put in writing, definitely in regulation if you can do so, and call those young people advisors. And the elderly people will then respect this position and talk in a more peer-to-peer fashion. Well, I find it very interesting to have a conversation with you like this. I find it very interesting in working on the new ideas and new questions and new thoughts around pretty much anything because I really like learning and I like learning the things that I wasn't aware. And so just by, for example, the virtue of the next questions, I find it very interesting that you would ask something like that. So to get to that question, on Sundays, I just spend time with my family. My parents, their parents, and so on, all live in New Taipei City in Danshui. So I either travel physically to Danshui, that's maybe twice a month, or also do a video conference if I cannot travel physically. And so that's how I spend my Sundays with my family. My favorite hobby is listening to people and answering interesting questions. My favorite food and sweets. Well, my favorite food and sweets are carbohydrates, proteins, and also fat, that's lipids. Well, in my idea, it's all about sustainability, all about working so that the world becomes a better place when I log out compared to the world that I logged in. That is to say, it's not just to the 7th generation down the line. It must be good for the next generation, the generation after the next, and so on, all the way to 7 generations. And that is, I think, the true meaning of sustainability, of giving rise to new civilizations, new way to configure the society, new way to work with the environment without foreclosing those possibilities. The dreams of future generations are the most important dream rather than the dream of our generation or even about myself. So my dream is to enable future generations' dreams.